Have you ever felt like someone only shows you love when you say yes? Like your worth depends on how much you sacrifice for them? The moment you try to say no, set a boundary, or choose yourself, suddenly you're the villain. They act hurt, they pause, they sigh, and without saying a word, they make you feel like you've done something wrong. It's like a phone they used to unlock at will, but now that you've changed the password, they call you secretive, or like an account they had access to. When you log them out, they act like you've betrayed the terms. Just like the phone and the account, your privacy isn't the problem. It's their loss of access. Because when they can no longer use your guilt to guide your choices, they start calling your boundaries selfish. They'll act confused, hurt, even noble, anything to shift the weight back onto you. But deep down, it's not your no that hurts them. It's the fact that it's no longer easy to get a yes. So, how do you stay grounded when guilt is being weaponized against your peace? Stick around till the end, because the last part will flip the script they've been trying to write for you all along. Number 1. Recognize emotional manipulation early. Let's talk about one of the most subtle yet deeply controlling tactics people use: emotional manipulation through guilt. It rarely starts with obvious accusations. It starts small. A long sigh when you say no, a disappointed look when you prioritize your peace, a silent pause that makes you feel like you've done something wrong when you haven't. These reactions are carefully placed. They're not random, they're bait. The goal? To make you second-guess your boundaries, to pull you into a spiral of shame for simply making a choice that protects your well-being. Here's the truth. Guilt tripping often starts subtly, with passive comments, emotional withdrawal, or expressions that make you feel like you owe them something. It's never about what's fair, it's about control. And the longer you ignore it, the deeper it seeps into your decisions. You start doing things you don't want to do, just to avoid that look, that silence, that sigh. And before you know it, you're living your life around someone else's reactions, not your own values. That's not kindness. That's emotional blackmail. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes essential. The Stoics taught that we are responsible for our own minds, not for how others choose to react. Epictetus said, "He who angers you conquers you. Detach, observe, and remain grounded." What does that mean in this context? It means when someone uses guilt to control you, your power lies in observation without reaction. Don't fall for the bait. Don't internalize their disappointment. Instead, pause, step back, and ask yourself, am I doing this out of alignment or out of obligation? If the answer is the latter, that's not a choice. It's manipulation. Let me share a story. A woman I know, let's call her Emily, had a friend who constantly guilt-tripped her. If Emily said she was too tired to hang out, her friend would reply with things like, "Wow, I just didn't think you'd be that kind of person." Or if Emily prioritized her own schedule, the friend would go silent for days. It worked. For a while. Emily would cave, apologize, make time she didn't have. But one day, she realized something. She wasn't being a bad friend. She was just being emotionally blackmailed. That's when she stopped reacting. She started standing firm in her decisions. And the moment she refused to respond to the guilt, the dynamic changed. Her friend backed off, not because she apologized, but because the manipulation stopped working. So how do you protect yourself from guilt tripping? First, spot the signs early. If someone's reaction is designed to make you feel bad for setting a boundary, pay attention. Second, hold your ground. You're not responsible for managing someone else's discomfort when your decision is rooted in self-respect. And finally, detach. Don't explain your choices to people who are more interested in controlling you than understanding you. At the end of the day, guilt only works if you believe you've done something wrong. When your choices are made with integrity, no one's disappointment should be strong enough to undo them. Recognize the manipulation early and reclaim your peace before it gets stolen in silence. Number 2, don't justify every decision. Let's talk about one of the most overlooked signs that someone is manipulating you, feeling the constant need to explain yourself. It sounds harmless. Maybe you're just being polite. Maybe you think if you explain your decision well enough, they'll understand. But pay attention. If you find yourself defending every no, over-explaining why you couldn't show up, or trying to soften every boundary you set, it's no longer about clarity, it's about control. And the more you explain, the more power you give away. Here's the truth. When you feel the need to justify your choices repeatedly, they've already started to control you. Because guilt-tripping often doesn't show up as a demand. It shows up as a raised eyebrow, a subtle pause, a shift in tone. And suddenly, you're backtracking. You're telling them why you couldn't make it, why you needed time for yourself, why you had to say no. Not because they asked, but because deep down, you're trying to earn their approval for your own life decisions. That's not communication, that's control, dressed up as courtesy. This is where Stoic wisdom cuts through the noise. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." In other words, live your truth. Don't waste your breath trying to get everyone else to understand it. The more you explain, the more it looks like you're seeking permission. But your boundaries, your time, and your energy aren't up for negotiation. They're yours. And the more confidently you hold them, the less you'll feel the need to explain them. Let me share a story. A friend of mine, let's call her Rachel, was always the nice one in her family. Anytime she made a decision for herself, whether it was taking a weekend off, declining an invitation, or simply not picking up a call, she'd follow it with a long explanation. "I was so tired. I hope you understand. I had a lot on my plate. Please don't take it personally." And guess what? The more she explained, the more pressure she felt to explain again next time. It became expected. Until one day, she stopped. She gave herself permission to say, "I won't be joining today," and left it at that. No apology, no explanation. And surprisingly, the world didn't fall apart. People adjusted. Because she stopped asking for permission to live her life. So how do you stop justifying every decision? First, notice the urge. If you catch yourself defending a choice that didn't harm anyone, pause. Ask yourself, why do I feel the need to explain this? Second, get comfortable with silence. You don't owe emotional reassurance to people who guilt you for having boundaries. And finally, lead with self-respect, not apology. At the end of the day, your life doesn't need to be submitted for approval. Stop explaining every move, say less, live more, and let your decisions speak for themselves. Number 3, set boundaries without apology. Let's talk about one of the most powerful things you can do for yourself, setting boundaries without apology. It sounds simple, right? But the moment you start saying no, pulling back, or prioritizing your peace, the guilt begins. Not from within, but from others. People who benefited from your lack of boundaries will suddenly act hurt. They'll say things like, "You've changed," or "I thought you cared," hoping you'll flinch, soften, and go back to saying yes, even when it drains you. Here's the truth. A manipulator will guilt you for drawing boundaries. They don't see your limits as healthy. They see them as inconvenient, because boundaries interrupt the access they had to your time, energy, and attention. And when they sense that shift, they don't ask what changed. They pressure you to feel bad for changing. They want you to believe that protecting yourself is selfish, that choosing peace over pleasing others makes you the villain. But here's what the Stoics would tell you. Anyone who guilt-trips you for having boundaries was never truly in your corner to begin with. This is where Stoic insight becomes your shield. Marcus Aurelius said, "No person is free who is not master of himself." In other words, if your choices are always tied to avoiding someone else's disappointment, you're not living freely. You're being emotionally managed. Setting a boundary isn't about rejecting people. It's about honoring your limits, your energy, your space. And when you do it clearly, without anger, without apology, you reclaim authority over your life. Let me share a story. A guy I know, let's call him Ray, used to be the go-to person in his group. Everyone came to him for favors, for help, for time. And Ray always said yes, even when it came at a cost to his mental health. The one time he finally said no, something changed. One of his so-called friends replied with, "Wow, I guess you're too busy for the people who were always there for you." That one sentence hit him hard. He almost backtracked, almost. But then he paused and realized, if someone's support depends on his availability, it's not support, it's convenience. That moment was a turning point. Ray stopped apologizing for needing space, and he started setting boundaries that were long overdue. So how do you set boundaries without apology? First, remind yourself that your needs are valid. You don't owe anyone an explanation for honoring them. Second, deliver your boundaries calmly and clearly. No guilt, no over-explaining. And third, expect pushback and don't let it shake you. Guilt is a common reaction from those who are benefiting from your silence. At the end of the day, protecting your peace isn't selfish. It's necessary. Stop apologizing for valuing your energy. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors with locks, and you choose who gets a key. Hold firm, stay grounded, and let your no be complete. If you've watched the video this far, don't forget to leave a comment with a "thank God" and give it a like if you enjoyed the content. Your support means a lot and motivates me to keep creating more interesting videos. I hope you find inspiration in them and that we continue learning together. Thank you for your support. Number 4. Watch how they react to your success. Let's talk about a form of guilt tripping that's rarely called out. How some people respond when you start growing. It's subtle but powerful. You land a new opportunity, hit a personal goal, or simply begin setting better standards for your life. And instead of cheering you on, they shift. They act distant, cold. Maybe they throw a little sarcasm your way or casually bring up the past, reminding you of who you used to be. Sometimes they don't say anything at all, just a disappointed smile or a passive-aggressive joke that leaves you second-guessing whether you should be proud of yourself at all. Here's the truth. Guilt trippers often resent your growth, not because you've wronged them, but because your progress highlights their stagnation. Your movement forward forces them to confront their lack of action, and instead of owning that discomfort, they redirect it. Suddenly, you're too busy, too good, or not who you used to be. They'll say you've changed, but what they really mean is you've evolved beyond their control. And to bring you back, they use the past like a chain, tugging at old versions of you, hoping guilt will shrink you back down. This is where Stoic insight cuts through. Seneca once said, "Your progress will bother those who remain stagnant. Keep rising." In other words, don't let the discomfort of others convince you to dim your light. Growth will always test the relationships around you. Some will rise with you. Others will try to hold you where they're comfortable. But your success is not a betrayal. It's a reflection of your discipline, your effort, and your right to move forward. Let me share a story. A man I know, let's call him Daniel, started his own business after years of working under someone else. He worked hard, kept his head down, and slowly began to succeed. But instead of support, some people close to him started questioning his character. "You've changed," they'd say. "You're not as humble as you used to be." One even joked, "Don't forget us little people now that you're famous." At first, Daniel felt guilty. He wondered if he was being arrogant, but then he realized he hadn't changed for the worse. He'd grown. The guilt wasn't coming from what he'd done, it was coming from what they hadn't. So how do you handle people who guilt-trip your success? First, recognize it for what it is. Projection, not truth. Second, never explain or shrink your progress to comfort someone else's insecurity. And third, keep rising. Quietly, steadily, unapologetically. At the end of the day, not everyone will celebrate your growth. Some will mourn the version of you they could manipulate. Let them. You're not here to stay small, you're here to evolve. Keep rising, keep building, and let guilt be the one thing you leave behind. Number 5, use calm silence as your weapon. Let's talk about one of the most powerful responses to manipulation: silence. Not the awkward, avoidant kind, but the kind that's intentional, grounded, and steady. When someone tries to guilt you, through passive jabs, exaggerated disappointment, or emotional bait, your instinct might be to defend yourself, to explain your decision, to prove that you didn't mean to hurt them. But here's the truth. Guilt-tripping thrives on your reaction. It feeds off your discomfort. And the more you speak, the more power you give it. So instead of reacting, try something stronger. Say nothing. Hold the silence. Let their tactics echo into stillness. Watch what happens when you don't flinch, don't justify, don't engage. You take the one thing they're trying to control, your peace, and you keep it. Because when you refuse to respond, you show them that their guilt no longer has a hook in you. And that's what ends the cycle. Not confrontation, but stillness. Here's the truth. When they guilt you, stay silent. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. You don't owe a defense for choosing your well-being. You don't need to debate your boundaries. Calm silence isn't weakness, it's composure. It says, I see what you're doing, but I no longer feel the need to respond to it. And that subtle power, it's disarming. It reveals more about their behavior than any argument ever could. This is exactly what the Stoics taught. Zeno said, silence is the strong man's shield. Speak only when it improves the silence. Stoicism reminds us that inner peace isn't preserved through constant explanation. It's guarded by restraint. When you master the art of silence, you stop playing their game entirely. You stop needing to prove, to explain, to correct their narrative. You become untouchable in the best way possible. Let me share a story. A woman I know, let's call her Lauren, used to constantly get guilt-tripped by a family member. Every time she set a boundary, she'd be met with dramatic silence or guilt-laced comments like, I guess I'm just not important anymore. For years, Lauren would respond, explaining herself, apologizing, trying to fix the discomfort, until one day she didn't. The next time it happened, she stayed quiet. No reaction, no explanation, just calm silence, and the shift was immediate. Her relative got uncomfortable, stumbled through more guilt-laced lines, and then stopped. The silence made the manipulation obvious, and more importantly, it broke its power. So how do you use silence as your weapon? First, pause before reacting. Not every comment deserves a reply. Second, recognize the difference between silence that avoids conflict and silence that protects peace. And finally, trust that stillness can say more than words ever could. At the end of the day, you don't need to fight fire with fire. You just need to stop fanning the flames. When guilt comes your way, meet it with calm stillness. Let silence be your answer and your armor. If you found this valuable, hit like and subscribe for more powerful insights. Number 6, don't internalize their pain. Let's talk about a subtle trap that guilt trippers often set, making their emotional burden feel like it's your responsibility to carry. It starts small. Maybe someone vents to you, leans heavily on your support, or shares their struggles in a way that subtly implies, if you really cared, you'd do more. And over time, without realizing it, you start carrying their weight. You cancel your plans to make space for their crisis. You suppress your own needs because theirs feel more urgent. And soon, their pain becomes your guilt, even though it was never yours to begin with. Here's the truth. It's not your job to carry someone else's emotional baggage. Compassion is noble. Empathy is beautiful. But when it crosses into self-sacrifice, it stops being kindness and starts being neglect of your own peace. The guilt tripper doesn't always ask directly. They just let the weight hang there, waiting for you to pick it up. And if you don't, they sigh, go silent, or say things like, "I guess I just have to deal with this on my own." It's a performance designed to make you feel responsible for what they're feeling. But you're not. They are. This is where Stoic wisdom offers clarity. Epictetus once said, "What weighs you down isn't theirs, it's what you choose to carry." That means your peace is tied not to their pain, but to your own choices. You can listen, you can care, but you don't have to bleed for someone just because they're hurting. Carrying someone's emotional load doesn't make you strong, it makes you tired, and eventually it makes you resentful. Let me share a story. A woman I know, let's call her Jessica, had a sibling who always reached out in times of crisis. Jessica was the fixer, the helper, the shoulder to cry on, but it was never mutual. The support was one-sided, and when Jessica needed space, the guilt rolled in. Must be nice to have the luxury to ignore people's problems. That one line hit hard. She almost caved. But then she realized she didn't owe herself to anyone. She could love deeply and still choose boundaries. And when she stopped carrying what wasn't hers, her peace came back. Not because the problems disappeared, but because she stopped making them her own. So how do you stop internalizing someone else's pain? First, create space between empathy and responsibility. You can care without overcommitting. Second, watch for manipulation disguised as vulnerability. Not every cry for help is innocent. Some are controlling. And third, return to your center. Ask yourself, is this mine to carry? If it's not, set it down. At the end of the day, you are not a container for someone else's chaos. Let your compassion be strong, but let your boundaries be stronger. Because your peace isn't preserved by how much you carry, it's preserved by knowing what's yours to hold and what's not. Number 7, walk away from the power game. Let's talk about the moment when silence, logic, and boundaries aren't enough. When someone keeps pushing, keeps guilt-tripping, keeps testing how much of yourself you're willing to sacrifice just to maintain peace. That's when you realize this isn't about connection anymore. It's a power game. And the most powerful move you can make isn't to argue harder or explain deeper. It's to step away, not in anger, not to punish, but to protect something sacred, your inner peace. Here's the truth. Manipulators thrive on emotional tug-of-war. They want a reaction. They want you caught in the loop of pleasing, justifying, proving. Because the moment you play, they win. But when you disengage, when you stop showing up for the performance, they lose access, not to your kindness, but to the control they once held over you. Walking away doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've stopped entertaining anything that costs your peace more than it's worth. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes your compass. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Withdraw into yourself. A well-ordered mind is a fortress." In other words, your peace is your responsibility and your protection. Not everyone deserves access to your energy, especially those who constantly seek to disrupt it. When guilt becomes a pattern, distance becomes necessary. Because healing can't happen in a battlefield, and some people only understand boundaries when they meet silence and space. Let me share a story. A man I know, let's call him Ethan, had a longtime friend who used guilt like currency. If Ethan said no to a plan, the friend would respond with lines like, "I guess I just care more than you do." Every interaction left Ethan drained, questioning himself, even when he did nothing wrong. Eventually, he stopped explaining, stopped engaging. He didn't make a dramatic exit. He just created space. No anger, just distance. And in that space, he realized something. His energy began to return. Not because the friend changed, but because Ethan did. He stepped away from the emotional tug-of-war and found clarity in silence. So how do you walk away from the power game? First, recognize when connection has turned into control. If every interaction feels like an emotional transaction, it's no longer healthy. Second, release the need to fix it. Some dynamics can only be healed through distance, not dialogue. And third, choose peace, quietly, firmly, without apology. At the end of the day, the strongest move is not to fight harder, it's to rise above the game entirely. You owe no one your energy at the cost of your sanity. So withdraw, protect your mind, and let your stillness say what words never could. I choose peace over power plays every time. If you believe this video can help others, give it a like. It helps the YouTube algorithm show it to more people. And don't forget to subscribe for more awesome content coming your way. Share your thoughts in the comments. I will definitely reply.